Hi, this is Swapnil Bhartia, and in this special edition of TFR Newsroom for Open Source Summit, today we have with us Grace Francisco, VP Worldwide Developer Relations and Education at MongoDB. First of all, Grace, welcome to the show. Tomorrow you are delivering a talk, online talk at the summit. Talk a bit about the kind of the theme of the talk.
Sure. I developed this talk specifically around this time frame where we've had to shift a lot of our workload and resources in developer relations. We spend a lot of time actually traveling and going out to speak. And so as the pandemic hit, we had to really lean into a lot of the online work we were already doing, but focusing on a lot of that. We had been accepted at many conferences for this first half of the year. So it was kind of disappointing for us to have those canceled or postponed. Many of them were actually canceled, which is sort of unfortunate. We're really sad for those communities that actually had to cancel their conferences. And, of course, our biggest developer conference, our premier conference for MongoDB, which is MongoDB World, also had to shift to an online format. And that, we really leaned into that experience heavily around what that should be. And a lot of that was a reflection of what our everyday lives are like. We have pets and kids and partners often walking behind us. And we sort of integrated what that experience is like just to reflect back, hey, we understand how you're operating right now. We understand these challenges. But on top of that, we also were reflecting on what can we do as technologists? What can we really do together as a community, even though we're not here together in person? What can we do even while we're apart? And one of those things that we decided to offer was basically Atlas. Atlas is our cloud offering for MongoDB, and making sure that people had credits to use on Atlas if they were trying to build a solution to help battle COVID-19. So whether it was creating a place to collect information. So there were some employee volunteers from our company and Apple and AWS and Google Alphabet to come together to build this solution where it was COVID-19 near you. And so it was like crowdsourcing the data to help medical professionals forecast and predict the trends of COVID in their area in the US. And that was done within a week time frame and was posted on Atlas. The other thing that my team specifically did was they looked at the Johns Hopkins data, and those were produced as flat file documents that you had to pull down and then ingest in some other database to then query. So we actually automate all of that, and we actually bring that into an Atlas instance, so that anyone anywhere in the world can actually query that data actively, create charts and reports around, and really create even an full application around it without having to do all that extra work.
If we just step back and look at, MongoDB is one of the big players in the open source space. If you look at open source development, most of it is already kind of distributed. A lot of your, contributors or developers, they are, from different part of the world. So we are kind of used to working in a distributed remote fashion. But the role that these events play is that once you share a beer with somebody, you spend 10 minutes, the confidence, the trust that it builds cannot be built, Yes, you can build online also, but it just changes the whole chemistry. I mean, I have made so many friends when I go to all these conferences, and those relationships are much more strong. Or I have known that person for like 10 years. We have been emailing, but when we met in person, that was different. That piece has been taken away. But still, moving to online also adds another aspect, which is you are now accessible to almost everywhere in the world, because usually people, because of either financial reasons or a lot of other travel restrictions, people cannot come to your event. So yes, there are some drawbacks. Hallway track is there, you cannot sit, but then there are a lot of advantages also. Have you kind of seen any advantage of moving to online?
I often remind my team that, while we did a really great job of landing a bunch of in-person events before this whole pandemic hit us, the one thing that I talk to them about a lot is online scale. And the reason being what you just had said before is not every developer can get to a conference. Not everyone has the financial resources. Some people don't have the interest or don't want to be in a really crowded developer event for whatever reason. And there are 24 plus million developers globally. And that's just counting professional developers. That's not even counting what I refer to as emerging developers, those student developers, those developers who are becoming developers in boot camps or doing like a second or third career shift in their lives. Doesn't count them. So there's a massive, massive number of people globally who are developing some kind of application or technology. You're not going to reach all of them in person. The in-person component certainly is very important because, as you said, when you go to a conference, there's nothing like being at that conference and speaking with people in person, that belonging and being able to relate and feel like you're making a real connection. That's so hard to replace. And you particularly really want to do that with, communities that you're really interested in working with and the community leaders that are in those groups. It's important to build those relationships whenever possible in person. But when you're thinking about like the mass scale of developers globally, you have to always think about scale. I think that is a super important component. So my teams were already doing this. They launched a developer forum. We hadn't had one before, so we set up our own developer forum. We started experimenting with Twitch, which has traditionally been used in gaming, but many developer advocates are starting to use that as a way to engage online with other developers and do coding hours, and just being able to talk to developers more in that sort of not quite one-on-one, but one-to-many in a smaller format, sometimes very large format because it can scale up, given that it's for gamers. Yeah, so we were already doing that. We even experimented with TikTok. And a couple of our developer advocates have gotten quite a number of followers interested in them just from their short format TikToks. So, that engagement piece is super important, and feeling like your belonging is super important. And while we are all sort of separated right now, we can't come in person to a developer event. You have to find those avenues where, one, going to where developers are, don't expect them to come to you all the time, right? Because if you're trying to reach a segment of developers you've never worked before, you got to go find out where they're hanging out and go, make friends and connect there first before you're saying, come over here. So there are some adjustments, but these are things that we were already weaving in and integrating as part of our developer strategy.
What role is MongoDB playing in this, cloud native world, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud world, and what makes it so popular?
So MongoDB plays a really important role in this multi-cloud world. So we are available on GCP and AWS and Azure. And this year, again, for the fourth year in a row, we were listed in Stack Overflow's developer survey as being the most wanted database. Fourth year in a row. That says a lot when you're talking about that global scale developers that are out there. So we were, very pleased with that outcome, and it's really a reflection of just the energy and interest in developers, and the dynamics of what's happened in the cloud has made developers that much more powerful and influential in the buying cycle, right? The fact that you can simply go sign up for a cloud service, try it out, build something on it, and then use that as your proof of concept to your leader or whatever startup you're building to say, this is what I want to build on, is a powerful thing to be able to do. And the fact that developers are even using their own credit cards and expensing these services has really changed the landscape of how we do purchasing decisions. There are a couple of reports that I read over the last couple of years where they basically indicate that 50% of those developers that filled out those reports are involved actively in influencing a purchase, a technology purchase, or they bypass whatever mandate has been put in an enterprise and say, well, that doesn't work for me, I'm going to go use this other thing, because they have that freedom and flexibility. And if you think about the ongoing global demand for technologists, there aren't enough of us to fulfill every open role that's out there. It's easy to see why, with the cloud dynamics, with the lack of enough people to fill these open roles, the developers are right front and center of making these technology choices in many cases.
Now, if you look at MongoDB, when you talk about this popularity or adoption of a specific technology, there are two aspects that play a big role. One is that the technology itself is so good, or the community, open source community around is so good that people just flock towards it. Or second is that there are a lot of investment made to build those relationships. So in this case, did the technology and open source nature made your job easier to build those relationships, or can you talk about that chemistry, the role that it plays in building that kind of trust, and that build that ecosystem around your technology?
I think it can certainly play a role. When you're working with open source, I think one of the things that developers often look for is that transparency and openness to contributions, and be able to look at the source and trust that there's basically a community and particularly a specific entity in many cases behind that is going to be there for some time. Like they're looking at investment of, is this the right technology, and can I see the code, and does this solve my problems? And to be honest with you, when I joined last year, I'd heard about MongoDB back in 2010 when I was still at Microsoft. Back then, I was one of the first people actually actively working with open source communities before, we're really a welcome member of those open source communities. That was kind of a tough job to do. And I still very distinctly remember talking to this gaming developer on some other open source project initiative that we were working on. And he just by chance started talking about this new technology that he was using in his game, and it was MongoDB. And he was talking on and on and on about the performance, the scale, the innovation that he could have with his game based on using MongoDB. And it was so powerful to hear him say that, because I never asked him about it. He just impromptu went on and on and on about it and the value of this new technology. And to a huge degree, actually, it's those people, especially those early adopters, who are just big advocates, who continue to talk about it. Those are really your best developer relations, developer advocates that you could possibly ever have in a company. It's not the ones that you hire. I mean, I love my developer advocates and they're really awesome and great. But the ones that are outside, who are actual users externally of your product, those are the most impactful developer advocates you could possibly ever have, because they're really honestly speaking about the value of the technology, which is why when Stack Overflow, again, for the fourth year in a row, people are saying most wanted database, that's a great place to be. We're so proud of that.
Awesome. Thank you, Grace, so much for taking your time out and talking to us today. As I said, that it would have been great if we could have met in person at the event, but hopefully we'll by the time everything is settled down, we'll resume our life again. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.